Hey guys, if this is your first time to my channel, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Emily and today we are going to be predicting something that is very nostalgic for me and a lot of people across the world. We are going to be predicting palettes for the new Crayola beauty line. So before we get started with this video, just a heads up, I am aware that I am flakier than a biscuit right now. I don't know what the hell has been going on with the weather or my skin or my lack of drinking water. I don't know, but I am literally a frosted flake right now. And if you can see that on camera, I apologize. Trust me, I don't want to look at it either, but let's try and ignore the situation that's happening on my face right now with, Tony the tiger and his frosted flakes. I don't understand. I went from having oily skin to having oily and dry skin. Great. So I am sure you guys have already heard of the new Crayola beauty line that has recently launched at ASOS.com. So many beauty bloggers have done reviews on it. I know Jeffree Star has, Tarte has, a lot of people have done reviews, and from what I can tell, the products don't seem that great. But I feel like it's more of a nostalgia type of situation here. They're basically playing off of our nostalgia of using the iconic Crayola crayons when we were in elementary school and whatnot. And people will buy it just for that reason. I mean, I think that it's cute as all hell, and I know there's a lot of people out there who want to buy it just for the fact that it is Crayola, and the little eye crayons literally look like crayons that you would get from a crayon box. But cuteness aside, the brand so far seems to be pretty hit and miss, and the one letdown for a lot of people was that eyeshadow palette that they came out with. It was a pressed powder eyeshadow palette, and I think a lot of people had high expectations for it, and it kind of just fell short. I was watching Tati from Glam Life Guru's review on the palette and the rest of the Crayola line, and she was actually talking about how they should have come out with actual palettes that resemble the iconic Crayola watercolor palettes. The ones that you can buy at the drugstore for like $1.99 that have actual real watercolors in them. Tati threw that idea out there, and I had to scoop that idea up. I walked over to the little Tati idea trash can and I dug through it like a filthy animal and picked up her old idea here. So this is Tati's idea, but I wanted to play off of it because she just kind of threw it out there into the universe, and I wanted to somewhat make it a reality. So if you have not already guessed, yes, I have in fact created 2 palettes for the Crayola beauty line that I wish would come out and that possibly someday might come out. I mean, it seems like a pretty no-brainer idea for me, and I'm sure that Crayola Beauty is going to watch Tati's review, and maybe they will get inspired to actually make palettes that look like the watercolor set. But until then, I wanted to put my creativity to the test as per usual and create my own. Obviously, these palettes are supposed to resemble the classic, timeless, iconic Crayola watercolor palette. So I wanted to make 2 different palettes for this watercolor palette line. I wanted one of the palettes to be very pastel-y and very watercolor-esque. To me, when I think of watercolors, I think of pastels. I don't know if I'm the only one that feels that way. I might be standing alone here with this idea, but I always think of watercolors as pastels in my head. So I wanted to create a palette that really resembles what I picture in my head when I think of watercolors. So this is what my first palette creation here looks like. As you can see, it very much so resembles the old school Crayola watercolor palettes, and of course you get a brush in there as well, which I feel like would be perfect for an eyeshadow palette because most of the times we do get brushes in our eyeshadow palettes, and I feel like this was just a missed opportunity. But nonetheless, complaining aside here, let me go ahead and get into the colors that I chose for the Colors of the Wind pastel watercolor palette. The first shade that I wanted to put in was, of course, a matte, kind of mid-toned pastel warm pink. I love shades like this, if you can't already tell. I wear shades like this all the time, and I think it's the perfect transition shade, especially when you're doing a pastel look, when you're doing a more warm toned look. I think that this is the most beautiful transition pinky perfect shade. The next shade that I wanted to put in was something to kind of complement that first transition shade. If you just wanted to go for a 2 eyeshadow look, then you could just pop on the pink transition shade in the crease and then pop on this beautiful foiled warm pink. I wanted this foiled pink to not be too light. I wanted it to stay a mid-toned foiled pink instead of going for something a little bit brighter, a little bit more champagne toned, because I want this to work for multiple skin tones. When you're working with pastel shadows, it's really easy for them to get lost on deeper skin tones. So I really wanted to keep that in mind, and I really wanted these palettes to work for everyone. The next shade that I wanted to pop into this palette is a matte pastel apricot orange shade. And obviously this would be great for the crease, this would be great for underneath the lower lash line. You could do a one eyeshadow look with a shade like this. And I feel like it really added to the warmth of this palette because there is a lot of blues and a lot of purples, and I wanted something that wasn't a red because I feel like red is a little bit too intense for a pastel palette. And I feel like we see pastel yellows pretty often, so I wanted to put in a true apricot pastel orange. So I'm sure you guys can guess why I chose to put this beautiful matte mint green shade in this palette. This just screams pastel to me, this just screams watercolor, and I feel like this would be a color that a lot of kids would like to use. I know that sounds really weird and creepy, but when you're thinking of Crayola watercolors, you're thinking of little kids using paint. When I was little, I loved shades like this, and the Crayola brand seems to be about the nostalgia factor of things, so I feel like playing up the nostalgia factor and putting in a shade like this that can really bring you back to your childhood fit perfectly in with this theme. The next shade I wanted to put in is this beautiful foiled aqua mint green. I wanted this shade to be a bit more blue toned because I feel like it could really contrast well with the mint shade and not get too muddied together. I feel like sometimes, especially with pastel shades, if you stick to a very similar color scheme and you go for, say, a matte mint in the crease, and then you go for a foiled mint on the lids, by the end of the day things can muddy up a little bit, so I wanted a very subtle difference in the two shadows. This way they could still work really well together, but you would still be able to notice the separation of color, if that makes sense. The next shade I put in is this beautiful foiled periwinkle shade, because when I think of Crayola, I think of the shade periwinkle. This is my childhood right here. I don't know why it's my childhood, but for some reason when I think of Crayola crayons, I think of gold, the salmon pink, and periwinkle. Why that is, we may never know. So moving on into the purples in this palette, I wanted to put in a mid-toned, kind of dusty pastel lilac shade. This is a bit warmer than most lilacs that I see, and it's a bit more muted, but it's still got that pastel vibe to it. I feel like this would be really beautiful with some of the lid shades that I put in this palette. I feel like you could pair this with the pinks because it does have that kind of more warm undertone, but you could obviously still pair it with the greens and the purples and whatnot. So I just wanted a shade that could work with everything, because people get scared of color and they think that you can't pair a lilac shade with an orange shade or something like that, and you kind of just need a similar color scheme. Now if I was going for like a cool tone lavender lilac-y shade with this warm apricot-y pastel orange, it might look a little bit odd. I mean, you can make anything work, and I'm sure you could make a bunch of cool eye looks using those types of colors, but I feel like using the two warm shades, even though they're very different and very contrasting, because they both have the warm undertone, they will complement each other wonderfully. And the last shade that I wanted to put in this palette is a deep indigo purpley matte shade. Another crayon that I think of when I think of Crayola is the shade indigo. Like I said, I don't know why that is. I don't know why I remember these specific colors, but I just think of indigo when I think of Crayola crayons. And of course these are watercolors, but it's still Crayola, so it still counts. But I wanted to put in a shade that was really deep, but still has vibrant color. I feel like the shade would blend out really nicely and blend out a little bit lighter than what you see in the pan, or if you wanted to, you could go for something really dark and really smoky and really pack this on the lid, the outer V, lower lash line, eyebrow, chin, elbow, I don't know, wherever you want to pack it. I feel like you could get that really intense, deep blackened indigo shade with just a couple layers of the shadow. So that is it for my Crayola Colors of the Wind Pastel Watercolor Palette. So the next palette that I designed is a little bit more traditional. I wanted to really replicate the OG original Crayola watercolor palette that you get from the drugstore that you used as a kid. I wanted to really play up that nostalgic factor, and I wanted to create something that was very, very reminiscent of it, because when you see the pastel palette, you think, okay, those colors are pretty cool, but if you're not super familiar with the Crayola watercolors, maybe you're more of a rose art kind of person. We don't judge here. It's okay if you were a rose art kind of person, because I'm the first one to admit that I kind of dabbled in rose art as well. I wanted to create a palette that you could see from a distance and know exactly what it is. So without further ado, my friends, this is my Crayola Classroom Watercolor Palette. Obviously, I named this one Classroom because I used this in elementary school in the classroom all of the time when I was younger. And I think a lot of people have the same similar memory of using these in class. So I feel like naming it after a classroom was almost needed in this situation. So when I was designing this palette and I was trying to model it after the original watercolor palette from Crayola, I noticed that there's actually a lot of deep shades in that palette. Now granted, it is paint, it's not eyeshadow, so it probably translates differently. Okay, not probably, it does translate differently to paper, but from a visual standpoint, it looked very dark, so I wanted to take the color scheme and brighten it up a little bit and amp everything up. So instead of putting the classic pure white shade from the OG Crayola watercolor palette, I wanted to put in something that was kind of like a take on that in eyeshadow form. So instead of going for just a white shimmery eyeshadow, I wanted to go for something a little bit more fun. So I decided to go for a foiled, almost opal-y looking eyeshadow. This would be a foiled blue eyeshadow that has reflex of pink and reflex of white. So it would have some kind of silvery, pinky white reflex in it, but it would be more of a kind of light periwinkle base. And I feel like that would really bring a kind of opal vibe. I feel like it would be beautiful with these bright colors. I want a shade like this in real life. I think a shade like this in real life would be so incredibly pretty, and I want it. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like a gemstone palette would be beautiful. Has anyone done that before? Please do let me know, because that sounds like a good idea to me. And if someone's done it, then I want to check it out. But if no one's done it yet, we might have to do another one of these palette predictions. The next shade I wanted to put in is a very familiar face. I wanted to put in a very bright, almost neon yellow matte. This would be perfect to start a warm eyeshadow look. This would be beautiful with the kind of berry pink that I have coming up. This would be beautiful all over the lid. I am a sucker for a good yellow matte shade, and I know that a lot of people are, and of course I had to represent the yellow in the OG watercolor palette. So moving on down the line here, the next shade that I wanted to put in is kind of like the apricot shade from the pastel palette, the Colors of the Wind palette, but it's a lot deeper and not pastel. This is like your Sugar Pill Flame Point right here. This is a very true vibrant orange that's a bit deeper in tone. I wanted to put in an orange, but I didn't want it to be too similar to the one in the pastel palette. So I decided to make it a little bit deeper and a little bit more richly toned. It almost has a burnt orange vibe to it, but it's not quite burnt orange. It doesn't have a complete brownish burnt undertone, but it has just little tiny baby hints of it. So the next shade that I put in the palette is kind of my take on a primary vibrant red. I wanted to put in a matte red shade, but I didn't want it to just be a basic everyday average Joe red shade. I wanted to amp it up a little bit. So I decided to make it a very vibrant reddened pink shade. So technically the shade is a pink, but if you were to build it up on the eyes, it would translate more red. Depending on what you pair it with, it would kind of change the color of the eyeshadow. I really like eyeshadows like that. I think they can be really handy and you can get a lot of different looks, and they can be very versatile because you can pair it with an indigo shade and get more of a primary red vibe, or you can pair it with a pink or a peach shade and get a lot more of that pinky undertone out of the shade. Next up in the Classroom palette is one of my favorite shades that I picked out for this entire palette collection situation here. This is a beautiful, super foiled, metallic, high shine berry pink shade. It's a lot deeper than your typical berry pink. It almost has a kind of garnet vibe to it. There I go again, talking about gemstones. I'm really thinking that this needs to happen. If it doesn't already exist, I'm about to put my noggin to the test and get my creative juices flowing and make a gemstone palette, because why the hell not? But that is a video for another time. So let's get back to this beautiful foiled berry pink shade. This shade is a lot deeper than a typical foiled pink and has a lot more of a red undertone. So I feel like it would pair really beautifully with, of course, the kind of reddened berry matte shade. It would pair beautifully with the orange and the yellow shade. And to be honest, you can pair it with the blues and the greens if you're really feeling out there and you feel like you want to go for something very bold and very bright. If you're familiar with the Crayola watercolor palette that we used in school to paint and whatnot, there was always a deep, vibrant, emeraldy, kind of foresty green shade, and I wanted to just mimic that here. I feel like it would have been a sin to leave this out of this palette. So moving on to the second to last shade that I decided to put in this palette, I wanted to put in a foiled mid-toned teal that you could use all over the lid. You could use it with that green matte, but you could also use it with the orange to go for something very popsicle-y and summery. You could use it with basically anything in this palette. And the whole point of this palette is to kind of pair colors together that you wouldn't typically pair together. I feel like this palette is for someone who wants to really push themselves and go outside of the box and go outside of their comfort zone, and that is why I decided to put this in as a foil instead of just a matte, because then you're kind of forced to use these more warm-toned mattes with a more cool-toned foiled lid shade. I'm trying to push people out of their comfort zones here because I recently have been pushed out of my comfort zone, and it's pleasantly surprising. I mean, a couple weeks ago, I would have never done an eye look like this, but this is my first time ever doing an eye look like this, and I like it. So thank you to my friend Georgia who helped me step outside of the box. Or is it step outside of the bun? Jack in the Box? So moving on to the very last shade that I have in this palette, I wanted to do a play on the classic navy kind of cobalt blue that is in the Crayola watercolor palette, but I wanted it to be a foiled shade because I've kind of seen a lot of matte navy blues recently, or maybe it's just the matte cobalt blue phase that everyone's been going through, but I feel like I've seen kind of a lot of blue mattes lately, which is kind of obscure because for a while we weren't seeing those at all. So I don't know, maybe I'm totally like missing the mark here, but I wanted to put in something that I feel like, to me at least, is pretty unique. So this is a super foiled deep metallic navy shade, but I would want the shade to have teal and cobalt blue flecks in it, so it would really catch the light and look very vibrant when you are in direct sunlight or you're under fluorescent light. And when you're just in your average room, it would look a little bit more smoky. So I wanted something to be kind of mysterious because I feel like this is a very mysterious shade. But that is everything that I have for you guys today. I literally stayed up all night, like no joke, I'm not kidding. I literally stayed up all night making those. I know you might look at them and think that like a 5-year-old monkey made them, but I stayed up all night putting those together. And why did I do that? Because I feel like I'm just in a trance right now. I had to work at 6 in the morning and I just pulled an all-nighter, worked, and now I'm here. Where is the day gone? I don't know. But I really do hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you like the palettes that I made. I love both of them. I would purchase both of them with my own money. I think they're really cool. And if Crayola doesn't take Tarte's advice and jump on this train of making their palettes look like the OG traditional watercolor palettes, then I don't know if I can trust the Crayola brand, guys, because this is too good of an idea for them to pass up on. Like I said earlier, I'm sure that they're going to come across Tarte's review where she mentioned this idea, and I feel like they should really take some notes because this would have been the cutest idea. I mean, they came out with little crayons that look exactly like the real crayons, so why wouldn't they come out with palettes that look like watercolor palettes? I mean, it just makes sense, you know? But if you have been curious about the existing Crayola line that is at ASOS, I definitely suggest checking out Tarte's video and her review because she's a very honest reviewer. I trust her opinion and she reviews things very well. So she did a pretty damn good review on it, and if it wasn't for that video, then I would have never gotten this idea. So thank you, Tarte. I'm sure you'll never see this, but this was a really fun idea to do, and I really hope that this becomes a reality someday. I do hope that you consider subscribing if you have not already. I am doing all sorts of makeup goodness on this channel, and hang tight for more palette predictions because I have one that might be coming tomorrow. I know, I've been pumping these out like crazy. I don't know what is going on. I've just been really inspired, I guess. I don't know. When I started this series, I didn't think that I was going to be uploading these this much. To be honest, I thought I would be doing a palette predictions maybe once every month, maybe once every couple of months, because I don't know, I feel like I just couldn't come up with stuff like this, but I have a lot of ideas brewing up here, and I think I'm going to be putting up another one tomorrow because I'm currently working on one, and I'm very excited for it. So if you are interested in watching that and you are interested in this type of video and content, I do hope that you consider subscribing down below. But if you did enjoy this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up. And if you do enjoy my content and watch me pretty regularly, I do really hope that you consider pushing the notification bell because I'm sure that everyone is already aware of this, but YouTube does not want people like me to be on YouTube, okay? I am a very small, minuscule, tiny, microscopic YouTuber. I'm not even a YouTuber, but I make videos. But YouTube doesn't want to suggest any of my stuff to anyone, and I like these types of videos, okay? I like them. There has to be other people out there that like them, right? I don't know. But with that being said, I hope you are having an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye!